My daughter-in-law sprayed air freshener every time I entered the room. Sorry, it's the old people smell. I never forgot.
Hey everyone, so glad you're here. Before we get into the rest of this, I have to know, where are you all watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's dive into this story because honestly, what happens next is just mind-blowing.
The hiss came before the cloud, the way thunder follows lightning when the storm is right on top of you. I had just stepped into the living room, still holding my library book, when Monica lifted the silver can and pressed the nozzle in one smooth motion. Lavender mist bloomed between us, a purple curtain I was expected to walk through, as if I were passing through some decontamination chamber at a hospital. I knew that smell. I had spent 40 years as an ER nurse. I knew what people sprayed when they wanted to erase something. Sorry, Monica said, not looking at me, already turning back to her phone. It's the old people smell. You know how it gets. She said it the way someone mentions the weather. No cruelty in her voice, no heat, just a flat observation, as if I were a condition to be managed rather than a person standing 6 feet away with a heart still capable of breaking. I didn't answer. At 71, you learn that some silences are louder than any words you could summon. And besides, my throat had closed around whatever response might have formed there. I walked through the mist. What else could I do? And climbed the stairs to the room that was supposed to be mine. My name is Vivian Kowalczyk, and 3 months ago, I sold the condo I had owned outright for 30 years and gave my son Gregory $180,000 so he and his wife could afford this house. The understanding, spoken, promised, repeated, was that I would have a real home here, a place with family, a room of my own with a door I could close when I needed quiet. What I received instead was a corner bedroom with a window that faced the neighbor's air conditioning unit and a daughter-in-law who treated my presence the way one treats a persistent stain on good upholstery. The air freshener had started in my second week. At first, it was subtle. A spritz after I left a room, the can quickly hidden when I turned around. I told myself I was imagining things, that Monica was simply particular about scents, that perhaps I really did carry some trace of age that my own nose couldn't detect. I even began showering twice a day, changing my clothes more often, dabbing lavender oil behind my ears like some anxious teenager before a date. None of it mattered. The can followed me through the house like a curse I couldn't outrun. I sat on the edge of my bed. Not my bed, really, just a mattress I slept on in a room I was permitted to occupy, and looked at the book still clutched in my hands. A novel about a woman who reinvents her life at 60. I had chosen it hoping for inspiration. Now it felt like mockery. Through the floor, I heard Monica's laughter, bright and careless, the laughter of someone who knows she holds all the cards in a game the other player didn't even realize they were playing. The dinner party happened on a Thursday in early February, one of those gray days when the sky seems to press down on your shoulders from the moment you wake. Monica had invited her parents, Don and Trish, to see the new house. To admire it, really, the way you invite people to admire a trophy. Gregory had come home early to help with preparations, though by help, he meant staying out of Monica's way while she directed caterers who cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to be. I wore my navy dress, the one Raymond always said made my eyes look like the sea before a storm. I had pressed it that morning, hung it on the closet door, looked at it for a long moment before putting it on. Armor, I suppose. The kind you wear when you know you're walking into something but can't quite name what. Don and Trish arrived with wine that probably cost more than my first car. They were pleasant enough in that polished suburban way. Handshakes that lasted exactly the right amount of time. Compliments that landed precisely where they were aimed. Trish had the look of a woman who had never doubted her place in any room she entered. I recognized the type. I had treated plenty of them in the ER over the years, always surprised that illness didn't care about their country club memberships. We gathered in the living room for drinks before dinner. I had just settled into the armchair by the window. The one Monica had told me twice was more of a decorative piece, when she appeared in the doorway with that familiar silver can. "Oh, Vivian," she said, her voice carrying across the room with practiced lightness. "I didn't realize you were already down." She lifted the can and sprayed. Not subtly this time, not with any pretense of discretion. A long, theatrical arc of lavender mist that passed directly in front of my face. "Sorry, everyone," she announced to her parents with a small, apologetic smile. "We're still managing the situation. You know how it is with older relatives. The smell just clings." Trish laughed. Not a cruel laugh, exactly. More the laugh of someone who understands a code and wants you to know she's in on it. Don studied his wine glass as if it contained something fascinating. Gregory stared at the carpet, his jaw tight, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I sat very still. The mist settled on my skin, my hair, the navy dress I had pressed with such care that morning. I could feel it dampening my cheeks like tears I refused to cry. "Well," Trish said brightly, breaking the silence. "Shall we move to the dining room? I'm simply dying to see what you've done with the space." They filed out, Monica leading the way, already describing the custom light fixture she had ordered from some designer in Portland. I remained in the armchair for a moment longer, breathing slowly, waiting for the trembling in my hands to stop. Gregory paused at the doorway. For one brief second, I thought he might say something. An apology? An acknowledgement? Anything that would tell me he still remembered who had changed his diapers and sat up with him through fevers and driven him to soccer practice in the rain for 12 years straight. "Coming, Mom?" he said instead, his voice carefully neutral. I rose and followed him to dinner. What else could I do? The meal passed in a blur of small talk and careful avoidance. I answered questions when asked, smiled at appropriate moments, complimented the food I could barely taste. Monica held court at the head of the table, Trish hanging on every word about renovation plans and neighborhood politics and the various insufficiencies of the local school district. Don contributed the occasional observation about real estate values. Gregory nodded along, the silent chorus to his wife's performance. No one looked directly at me. Not once. After dessert, I excused myself with a murmured headache and climbed the stairs to my room. The house was loud below me. Laughter, the clink of glasses, Monica's voice rising and falling in animated conversation. I closed my door and sat on the edge of the bed, still in my navy dress, still smelling of lavender. The window was open. I stared at it for a long moment, not quite understanding. February in Ohio. The temperature outside was 19 degrees. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the cold air that poured into the room. I hadn't opened that window. I never opened that window. My arthritis made the old sash difficult to manage, and besides, what possible reason would I have to air out a room in the dead of winter? I walked over and pulled it closed, my fingers stiff from the cold. The latch clicked into place with a small, final sound. Not an accident. Windows don't open themselves. Someone had come into my room while I was downstairs being sprayed like an unwelcome insect and deliberately let in the February night. I sat back down on the bed, my hands folded in my lap, and looked at the closed window for a very long time. When you spend 40 years in an emergency room, you develop a particular relationship with truth. You learn to read it in the things people don't say, in the pauses between words, in the eyes that slide away from yours, in the small inconsistencies that accumulate like sediment until the real story finally surfaces. You learn that denial is a place people live, sometimes for years, sometimes for entire lifetimes. And you learn that the moment you stop denying is the moment everything changes, whether you're ready for it or not. I had seen denial kill people. I had watched wives insist their husbands were fine while the monitors screamed otherwise. I had listened to parents refuse to believe their children were using drugs, even as the track marks told a different story. I had held the hands of patients who swore they didn't need surgery, that the pain would go away on its own, right up until the moment it didn't. And now, somehow, after 40 years of recognizing denial in others, I had become its latest victim. I had been denying since the day I moved in. Small denials at first. She's just particular. She's under stress. She doesn't mean it that way. Then larger ones. Gregory will speak up eventually. Things will settle down. I just need to give it time. I had built an entire architecture of excuses. A house of cards I kept standing through sheer force of will, because the alternative was admitting that my only son had let me sell everything I owned to buy myself a place where I was treated as contamination. That night, lying in my cold room with the window finally closed, I let the cards fall. I thought about Raymond, my husband of 43 years, dead now for 5. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that announces itself too late and leaves too quickly. He had been gone within 4 months of the diagnosis, and I had spent the first year after his death simply remembering how to breathe without him. We had met when I was 22, a brand new nurse still startled by how much blood the human body could hold. He was a paramedic, calm in crises, funny in the quiet moments between. We built a life together, not a glamorous one, but solid. The kind of life where you know exactly who will be there when you come home. Raymond used to say that marriage was like nursing, mostly unglamorous work, punctuated by moments of pure grace. He had a way of making the ordinary feel meaningful. Saturday mornings with coffee and the newspaper, Tuesday nights when we'd watch terrible movies and make fun of them together. Sunday dinners that went on for hours because neither of us wanted to. Clear the table and end the conversation. When he got sick, he handled it the way he handled everything, with practicality and dark humor. "Well," he said when the doctor delivered the news, "at least I won't have to fix that fence I've been avoiding." I laughed because he wanted me to, and then I went into the hospital bathroom and cried until I couldn't breathe. 4 months. That's all we had. 4 months of chemo that didn't work, of hope that kept shrinking, of conversations that felt too important and never long enough. On his last day, he held my hand and told me to live fully, to not spend my remaining years waiting for death to catch up with me. "Promise me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you won't disappear." I promised. And then I spent 5 years slowly breaking that promise, shrinking myself smaller and smaller until I fit into a corner bedroom in my son's house, apologizing for the space I took up. Gregory was our only child. A sweet boy, everyone said. Maybe too sweet. He had Raymond's gentle temperament, but not his backbone. I watched him grow up, always seeking approval, always bending toward whoever held the most authority in any given room. When he was 12, a teacher accused him of cheating on a test, wrongly, as it turned out, and instead of defending himself, he simply apologized and accepted the failing grade. It took Raymond and me a week to uncover what had actually happened, and another week to force the school to correct his record. Gregory never mentioned it again. That was how he handled conflict, by pretending it wasn't there. He met Monica in college. She was everything he wasn't: decisive, ambitious, certain of her own worth. I understood the attraction. When you've spent your whole life unsure of your own shape, someone who seems to have all their edges clearly defined can feel like salvation. But I noticed, even then, how he shrank in her presence, how his opinions became her opinions, how the gentle boy I'd raised slowly disappeared into the outline she drew for him. Their wedding was lovely and impersonal, like a picture from a magazine. Monica's mother cried decoratively. Don gave a speech about mergers and acquisitions that was apparently meant as a metaphor for marriage. I sat in the front row in a dress Monica had selected for me and smiled until my face ached. After Raymond died, Gregory started calling more often. At first I thought it was grief, the natural impulse to hold tighter to the family you have left. But the calls had a quality to them, an edge of negotiation, a sense that they were building toward something. When he finally made his pitch 6 months ago, I understood. The house is perfect, Mom. 4 bedrooms, big yard, great school district. Monica found it. The only problem is the down payment. I listened to him describe the neighborhood, the potential for appreciation, the investment opportunity. I heard Monica's voice in every rehearsed phrase. "We'd have a room for you," he said, and his voice softened then, became almost the voice of the boy I remembered. "A real room, Mom. You wouldn't have to live alone anymore. You'd be with family." Family. The word landed in my chest like a stone in still water. I had been alone in my condo for 5 years. The silence had become its own kind of presence, heavy and patient, waiting for me every time I walked through the door. I had friends, yes. Other nurses from the hospital, neighbors who checked in. But friends go home at the end of the evening. Friends have their own lives, their own families, their own silences to fill. "Your name would be on the deed," Gregory added, "right alongside ours. It would be your house, too." I believed him. That's the part that still burns when I let myself think about it. I believed my own son. I sold the condo in 3 weeks. Good market, quick sale, $180,000 clear after fees. I wrote a check and signed it over with a hand that didn't even tremble. The real estate agent shook my hand and told me I was making a wonderful decision. 3 months later, I was sitting in a cold room that smelled of lavender, and my name was nowhere on any document. The small humiliations accumulated like snow, individually insignificant, collectively suffocating. My cooking was too slow. I had always cooked slowly, carefully, the way my mother had taught me, building flavors, adjusting seasonings, treating a meal as something that deserved attention. Monica preferred what she called efficiency, which, as far as I could tell, meant ordering delivery and reheating it in the microwave. After I spent an afternoon making borscht from my grandmother's recipe, Monica took one look at the red broth and wrinkled her nose. "The smell," she said. "Vivian, honestly, it gets into the furniture." She didn't eat any. Neither did Gregory. I ate my borscht alone in my room that night. The bowl balanced on my knees. The taste of my grandmother's recipe turned bitter in my mouth. My presence disrupted the flow. I was never entirely clear what this meant, but Monica mentioned it often. When I sat in the living room while she was watching television, when I walked through the kitchen while she was on the phone, when I existed in any space she had mentally designated as hers. Which, as it turned out, was most of the house. Maybe you'd be more comfortable upstairs, she would suggest, her voice light and reasonable. You have your own TV up there, don't you? And it's so much quieter. Better for your nerves. My nerves were fine. My nerves had been fine through 40 years of emergency medicine, through car accidents and heart attacks, and that terrible night in 1987 when a man walked into the ER with a rifle and I talked him down for 45 minutes while security called. The police. But I went upstairs anyway, because the alternative was fighting a battle I had already lost. Meals became a particular battleground. Family dinners, the ritual I had imagined when I agreed to move here, all of us around a table, conversation and connection, happened less and less frequently. Monica preferred to eat with Gregory. After you've had yours, Vivian, so we can have some couple time. The couple time never seemed to end. By my third week in the house, I was eating all my meals alone, either in my room or at the kitchen table before anyone else came home. It's just easier this way, Gregory said when I finally asked about it. Monica's been stressed at work. Big presentation coming up, you understand. I understood. I understood that my son had learned to dress up cowardice as consideration and call it kindness. The afternoon I heard the phone call, I wasn't even trying to eavesdrop. I had come downstairs to get a glass of water. A simple need, the kind of ordinary errand that shouldn't require planning or permission. Monica was in the sunroom with the door half open, her voice carrying clearly through the gap. I know, she was saying, laughter threaded through her words. But what can I do? She's here now. Gregory wouldn't even consider a facility until we've given it a fair shot. She made air quotes I could hear in her tone. Whatever that means. A pause, while whoever was on the other end responded. Oh, it won't be forever. Once she's placed somewhere, we'll convert her room into a rental unit. The Airbnb potential alone. I mean, we're talking an extra $1,500 a month, easy. More during football season. Another pause. No, she doesn't know. Monica laughed again, the sound bright and careless. She doesn't even know her name isn't on the deed. Gregory was supposed to add her months ago, but, well, you know Gregory. He hasn't gotten around to it. Honestly, the money's already spent. What's she going to do? I stood very still in the hallway, my empty glass clutched in both hands. The water I had come down for seemed very far away now, part of a different world where I still believed that my son had simply been busy, that the paperwork was just delayed, that my place in this house was anything more than temporary. Monica kept talking, but I stopped listening. I turned and climbed the stairs, each step careful and measured, the way you walk when you're not sure the ground will hold. The library became my refuge. It was 3 blocks away, a squat brick building from the 1950s that smelled of old paper and floor wax and the particular mustiness of books that had been read by thousands of hands. I started going there in my 3rd month, after the phone call, after the open window, after the accumulation of small cuts had finally drawn enough blood that I couldn't pretend anymore. At first I went for the silence, not the hostile silence of the house, where every quiet moment felt like a held breath, but a different kind, welcoming, patient, entirely without judgment. I would sit in the reading room with a book I wasn't really reading and let the afternoon pass in soft increments. Nobody sprayed anything when I entered. Nobody sighed at my presence or suggested I'd be more comfortable somewhere else. I was just another person in a public space, taking up exactly as much room as I was entitled to. The librarians learned my name after a few weeks. Small kindnesses. A smile when I walked in. A whispered recommendation. A chair saved near the window on the days I arrived late. These things shouldn't have mattered as much as they did, But when you've been living in a house where your existence is treated as an inconvenience, even the smallest acknowledgement that you're human can feel like a gift. I started reading memoirs. Women who had survived difficult things, illness, loss, betrayal, the particular cruelties that life reserves for those who dare to age. Their stories didn't make my own situation better exactly, but they made me feel less alone in it. There were others who had walked this road, others who had found their way through. It was there that I ran into Eleanor Chen. We had worked together at St. Vincent's for nearly 15 years, back in the days when the ER was chronically understaffed and every shift felt like a small war. Eleanor had been a charge nurse, the kind who kept her head when everyone else was losing theirs, who could dress down an incompetent resident and comfort a grieving family in the same 10-minute span. We had lost touch after I retired, the way you do, when the only thing you had in common was work, and suddenly the work is gone. She found me in the periodicals section, staring at a magazine about home renovation without seeing a single word on the page. "Vivian Kowalczyk," she said, and her voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm and direct, brooking no nonsense. "I thought that was you. What on earth are you doing hiding in the library in the middle of a Tuesday?" I looked up at her, this woman I had known for decades, and something in my face must have shown, because her expression shifted from pleasant surprise to concern. "Come on," she said, taking my arm. "There's a coffee shop next door. You look like you could use something stronger than magazine subscriptions." We sat in a booth by the window, weak February sunlight falling across the table between us. Eleanor ordered us both tea. She had given up coffee years ago, claimed it was murder on her blood pressure, and waited while I found the words. I told her everything: the sale of the condo, the money I had given, the promises Gregory made and the promises he didn't keep, the air freshener, the open window, the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I hadn't told anyone the full story before, had barely admitted it to myself, and once I started, I couldn't stop, the words pouring out like water from a cracked pipe. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her cup down carefully and looked at me across the table with those sharp eyes that had seen everything an ER could show you and then some. "Vivian," she said, "you look like a woman who's been apologizing for breathing." The words hit me like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "I keep thinking I should try harder," I heard myself say. "Be quieter. Take up less space. Maybe if you just what? Disappear completely?" Eleanor shook her head. "Honey, you've been disappearing. That's the problem." I didn't have an answer for that. I sat with the silence between us, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. "You need to know where you stand," she said finally. "Legally, I mean. The money, the house, all of it. You need to know what you're dealing with." "I'm afraid to look." "I know." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "But the thing about fear is, it only gets bigger when you don't look at it. You spent 40 years in the emergency room. You know that. The wound you don't examine is the one that kills you." That night, I went through my files, all the paperwork from the sale of the condo, all the records of the transfer, all the documents I had been too grateful, too trusting, too desperate for family to examine closely at the time. My name wasn't anywhere. Not on the deed, not on the mortgage, not on any document that connected me to the house I had helped pay for. The check I had written, $180,000, the sum total of my home, had simply vanished into Gregory and Monica's accounts, as untraceable as if I had thrown it into the sea. I sat at my small desk in my small room, the papers spread out before me, and finally understood what I had purchased when I sold my home. Not a place in my son's family, just a room. And even that, only for as long as they decided to let me stay. The next morning, I called the number I had kept in my address book for 30 years. Alan Fitzgerald, the lawyer who had handled Raymond's estate, who had sat with me through the paperwork of death with patience and kindness. He was semi-retired now, his secretary told me, but when I gave my name, he came on the line himself. "Vivian," he said, and his voice was older, but still the same, measured and warm, a voice that had talked me through the worst moments of my life. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" I told him. Not everything. Not the air freshener or the open window or the daily accumulation of small cruelties, but the facts, the money, the promises, the documents that didn't exist. He was quiet for a long moment when I finished. "Come into the office tomorrow," he said finally. "Bring everything you have. We'll take a look together." I went. I sat in his wood-paneled office with its smell of old books and furniture polish and watched him page through the records I had brought. His face remained professionally neutral, but I had known him long enough to read the small tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible shake of his head. "The good news," he said finally, "is that there's a legal path here. What you're describing, a substantial financial contribution to a property in reliance on a promise of ownership, that's the basis for a constructive trust claim. Courts take these cases seriously, especially with a paper trail showing the transfer of funds. And the bad news? The bad news is that it's your son." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "These cases are ugly, Vivian. They get into courtrooms and turn families inside out. I've seen parents and children who never speak again after the depositions are over." I thought about Gregory at 12, refusing to defend himself against a false accusation. Gregory at 25, letting Monica choose his tie for him. Gregory at 42, staring at the carpet while his wife sprayed his mother with air freshener in front of an audience. "I don't think there's much left to turn inside out," I said. Alan nodded slowly. "Then we'll start by sending a letter. Let them know you're aware of the situation and that you have legal options. Sometimes that's enough to bring people to the table." He walked me out to the lobby himself, something he hadn't done in all the years I'd known him. At the door, he paused. "Vivian," he said, "whatever happens, remember that protecting yourself isn't the same thing as starting a war. You're allowed to want what's yours." I carried those words with me on the drive home, turning them over in my mind like stones in a polisher, trying to make them smooth enough to hold. Monica was waiting for me when I walked through the door. She stood in the foyer with her arms crossed, and that particular expression I had come to know well, the one that meant she had decided something and expected reality to arrange itself accordingly. "We need to talk," she said. I set my purse down on the table by the door. The table Monica had told me twice was not really for everyday use. "About what?" "About your future. Our future. The family's future." She gestured toward the living room. "Gregory's in there. We've been discussing some options." I followed her into the room where, 3 months ago, she had first sprayed lavender mist in my direction. Gregory sat on the sofa with a folder in his lap, his face arranged in that careful, neutral expression I remembered from his childhood. The look he wore when he knew something bad was coming, but didn't want to be the one to deliver it. "Mom," he said, "please sit down." I sat in the armchair by the window, the decorative one. Monica took her position next to Gregory, close enough that their shoulders touched. A united front. "Vivian," she said, "we've been looking at some options for your long-term care. I know this is difficult to hear, but we really feel it's time to start planning for the next phase." The next phase. As if my life were a corporate project that had reached its quarterly review. She opened the folder Gregory was holding and pulled out a glossy brochure. A building with manicured lawns and smiling elderly faces. "Silver Meadows," the cover announced. "Gracious living for your golden years." "It's a wonderful facility," Monica continued, her voice taking on the bright, encouraging tone of a saleswoman. "Really top-rated. They have activities, a dining room, nurses on call around the clock. You'd be much more comfortable there than you are here." I looked at the brochure in her outstretched hand. I didn't take it. "And," she added, pulling out another set of papers, "we've had our lawyer draw up some documents to streamline the transition. Estate planning, really. Just to make sure everything is clear and organized going forward." I took the documents. I read them slowly, carefully, the way I had learned to read charts in the ER, looking for what wasn't said as much as what was. A consent form for admission to Silver Meadows Assisted Living Facility. An authorization for Gregory and Monica to make financial decisions on my behalf. And at the bottom of the stack, a declaration that I relinquished any claims, present or future, to the property at 4718 Maple Drive, or any funds used for its purchase. I set the papers down on the coffee table.
Wait, I have to pause for a second because this part is just insane. Do you guys think Vivian should have just walked away right then? Or was she right to try and fix things for her son? What would you have done in her shoes? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, back to the story.
"No," I said. Monica blinked. "I'm sorry? No, I won't be signing these." "Vivian, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly." I looked at Gregory, who was studying the carpet with intense concentration. "I understand that I gave you $180,000 on the promise that my name would be on the deed of this house. I understand that promise was never kept. I understand that you're now asking me to sign away any claim to that money while you move me into a facility that costs $6,000 a month, a cost which, I assume, you expect me to pay from the pension and Social Security that are all I have left." The words came out steady, clear, each one a stone I had been carrying for months and was finally setting down. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something harder. Resolve. "Mom," Gregory started, "I'm not finished." My voice surprised me. It was steady, clear. The voice of a woman who had spent 40 years delivering difficult news and learned that the only way through was through. "I also understand that I have been treated as an inconvenience in this house since the day I arrived. I understand that you spray air freshener when I enter a room because you find the smell of my existence offensive. I understand that my window was opened on a night when the temperature was 19 degrees. I understand that I have been eating alone, avoiding common spaces, apologizing for breathing, because somewhere along the way, I started to believe that was what I deserved." Monica's face had gone pale. Gregory still wouldn't look at me. "I understand," I said, "that I am not wanted here. But I am not giving up what is mine to make your lives more convenient. I've already given up enough." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house seemed to be holding its breath. Then Monica's expression hardened into something I hadn't seen before. The face beneath the polished surface, the one that had been there all along. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing," she said. If you fight us on this, it will get ugly, very ugly. And at the end of the day, you're 71 years old with no assets and no options. What exactly do you think is going to happen?" I stood up. My knees ached the way they always did these days, but I didn't let it show. "I think I'm going to take a walk," I said. "I need some air. Air that hasn't been sprayed to cover up my smell." I walked to the front door, picked up my purse from the table that wasn't for everyday use, and stepped outside into the February cold. I walked for an hour, maybe longer. The cold bit at my face and hands, but I barely felt it. I walked through the neighborhood I had helped pay for, past the houses I didn't own, through the streets of a life I had tried to buy and found out too late wasn't for sale. When I finally returned to 4718 Maple Drive, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed almost mocking in their beauty. I climbed the porch steps, the same steps I had climbed hundreds of times in the past 3 months, and put my key in the lock. The key didn't turn. I tried again, more carefully this time, thinking maybe my cold fingers had fumbled. But no. The key slid in smoothly. It simply wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the door, the February wind cutting through my coat. Inside my room, my former room, were my blood pressure medications, my phone charger, the photograph of Raymond I kept on the nightstand. The closet held clothes I had worn for decades, memories woven into every thread. The desk held letters from Raymond, cards from patients who had remembered me years after I'd treated them, the accumulated paper trail of a life. All of it on the other side of a door I could no longer open. I could have knocked, pounded on the door, demanded entry, called the police, and made a scene the neighbors would whisper about for months. There was a part of me, a large part, that wanted exactly that. Wanted to scream until my throat was raw, until Gregory had to come outside and look at what he had done. Instead, I turned around. I walked down the porch steps and stood on the sidewalk, looking at the house one more time. The lights were on in the living room. Through the window, I could see Monica moving around, probably preparing dinner, probably relieved that the problem had finally been forced to solve itself. Ruth Bergman had lived next door for as long as I had been visiting Gregory. Even back when this was just a house he dreamed of owning, back before the money, before Monica, before everything. She was 83 years old and had survived 2 husbands, a bout with cancer, and what she called the general indignity of getting old in a country that wishes you'd hurry up and disappear. I had always liked her. She was standing on her porch now, watching me with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Locked out?" she called. I nodded. "Come inside," she said. "I've got soup on the stove and a spare bed, and from the look on your face, you need both." I walked across the yard that separated our properties. Her property and Gregory's property, I corrected myself. I didn't own anything anymore, and climbed her porch steps. She held the door open for me and closed it firmly behind us, shutting out the cold in the house and the son who had chosen someone else. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," Ruth replied. "My soup is terrible. But the whiskey is excellent, and I have a feeling you could use some of that too." She was right. Her kitchen was warm and cluttered, full of the accumulated belongings of a long life lived without apology. Photographs crowded every surface, grandchildren, dead husbands, friends from decades past. A cat I hadn't known she owned appeared from somewhere and wound around my ankles, purring. Ruth poured whiskey into 2 mismatched glasses and pushed one across the table toward me. "Now," she said, settling into her chair with the air of a woman who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Tell me what those fools did this time. I told her. Not everything. Not the months of small humiliations, not the slow erosion of my sense of self, but enough. The money, the deed, the locked door. She listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each detail. Men are useless, she declared when I finished. I say that having been married to two of them, God rest their souls. They're like weather vanes. Point wherever the strongest wind blows and call it conviction. Gregory isn't, I started. The old reflexes still there, still defending him. Gregory let his wife treat you like dirt and did nothing, Ruth cut in. That's not nothing, Vivian. That's a choice. He made it over and over every day, and you don't owe him excuses for it. I had nothing to say to that. She was right, and we both knew it. You'll stay here as long as you need, she continued. And tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next. That night, lying in Ruth's guest bed with borrowed pajamas and a borrowed quilt and someone else's blood pressure medication that Ruth had in her cabinet just in case, I stared at the ceiling and waited for the tears to come. They didn't. What came instead was something I hadn't expected. Clarity. Cold and sharp, like the February air I had breathed during that long walk, but clean. Honest. The kind of clarity that only arrives when you've finally stopped pretending. I had spent 3 months trying to earn a place in that house, trying to be quieter, smaller, less offensive. Trying to smile through humiliations and excuse away cruelties because the alternative, admitting that my son didn't want me there, that the family I had tried to buy didn't exist, was too painful to face. But lying in a stranger's guest room, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a truth I couldn't deny anymore, I discovered something strange. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even sad, exactly. I was angry, yes. A deep, quiet anger that had been building for months without my permission. But beneath the anger was something else. Relief. The particular relief of a woman who has finally stopped carrying a weight she was never meant to bear. I thought about the door that wouldn't open, about my medications on the other side, my photograph of Raymond, my clothes and books, and the accumulated debris of 71 years. Important things, yes. Things I wanted back. But not one of them was as important as this. Lying in a bed where I was welcome, in a house where no one sprayed air freshener when I entered, surrounded by the quiet dignity of having finally said no. I slept better that night than I had in months. Morning came gray and cold, the way February mornings do in Ohio, but Ruth's kitchen was warm. She had made coffee, real coffee, strong and dark, and set out toast with butter and jam, simple food that tasted like kindness. My daughter's coming over this morning, she said as I ate. Nancy. She's a real estate lawyer in Cleveland. I called her last night while you were sleeping. I set down my coffee cup. Ruth, you didn't have to. Nonsense. You need help, and she's in a position to give it. Besides, she's been looking for an excuse to come see me. I'm old enough that every visit might be the last one, and she knows it. Nancy Bergman arrived at 9. She was a smaller, more polished version of her mother. Sharp eyes, practical haircut, the efficient manner of someone who bills by the hour and makes every minute count. She shook my hand firmly and asked if I minded if she took notes. I told her the story again, the facts arranged in the neat columns of legal relevance, the sale of the condo, the $180,000, the promise that my name would be on the deed, the promise that was never kept. Nancy wrote it all down, her pen moving quickly across the yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked up. "You have a case," she said. "A good one, actually. $180,000 contributed to a property in reliance on a specific promise of ownership. That's textbook constructive trust territory." With the bank records showing the transfer, a halfway competent judge would be sympathetic. What happens if I pursue it? Best case, they settle. Pay you back most or all of the money rather than go to court. Your son's name is on the mortgage, right? He could take out a home equity loan, refinance something. The money exists. It's just sitting in their property value instead of your bank account. And worst case? Worst case, it goes to trial, which would be slow, expensive, and extremely unpleasant for everyone involved. These cases tend to bring out the worst in families. She paused. But Vivian, and I say this as a lawyer and as a daughter, sometimes the worst needs to come out. Sometimes it's the only way to find out what's underneath. I thought about Gregory, who had never been able to face conflict. About Monica, who had built a life on controlling every situation she entered. About the locked door and the lavender spray and the papers asking me to sign away my rights. "I don't want a war," I said. "I just want what's mine." Nancy nodded. "Then let's start with a letter. Let them know you're aware of the situation and that you're prepared to pursue legal remedies if necessary. Give them a chance to do the right thing. And if they don't, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." She closed her notepad. "But in my experience, people who pull stunts like changing locks usually do so because they think no one is watching. Once they realize someone with a law degree and a clear legal theory, they tend to become much more reasonable." Ruth, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, made a small sound of satisfaction. "Good," she said. "Now who wants more coffee?" The letter went out that afternoon. I spent the next 2 days at Ruth's house, waiting. She refused to let me call it an imposition. "I've been rattling around this place alone for years. Having someone to talk to is a gift, not a burden." And instead, put me to work helping her organize the basement storage room she had been meaning to tackle since her second husband died in 2019. We sorted through boxes of old photographs and china sets and Christmas decorations that hadn't been used in decades. We talked about our husbands, both dead. We talked about our children, both disappointing in their various ways. We talked about getting old in a world that seemed to have less and less room for us. "The thing about being our age," Ruth said one afternoon, holding up a porcelain figurine of a shepherd that had belonged to her grandmother, "is that you've already lost so much. People, places, possibilities. You spend so many years accumulating, and then suddenly you're on the other side, and everything starts slipping away. It makes you hold on tighter to what's left." "Is that what I was doing?" I asked. "Holding on too tight?" "Maybe. Or maybe you were holding on to the wrong things." She set the figurine down carefully. "There's a difference between holding on to your home and holding on to the idea that your son would become someone he's never been." I didn't have an answer for that. I just kept sorting through the boxes, letting her words settle into the silence between us. On the 3rd day, Gregory came. I saw his car pull up to Ruth's house from the living room window. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, not moving, and I watched the struggle play across his face even from that distance. He looked older than I remembered. Older than he had looked just 3 days ago, as if the time since then had been measured in years instead of hours. He came alone. That, at least, was something. Ruth answered the door before he could knock. She looked at him with an expression I recognized from my years in the ER, the look nurses give family members who have finally shown up after days of absence. "She's in the living room," Ruth said. "Don't make me regret letting you in." Gregory walked into the room where I was sitting. He didn't sit down. He stood by the door, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes moving around the room without landing on anything. "Mom," he said finally, "I got the letter." "Good. I didn't—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't know Monica was going to change the locks. That wasn't supposed to happen." What was supposed to happen? He had no answer for that. "Were you supposed to add my name to the deed months ago?" I asked. "Were you supposed to treat me like family instead of a tenant? Were you supposed to say something, anything, when your wife sprayed air freshener in my face in front of an audience?" "Mom, it's complicated." "No, Gregory, it isn't." I stood up, feeling every one of my 71 years in my knees and back and heart. "I gave you everything I had, not just the money. Everything. I gave up my home, my independence, my sense of myself, all because I believed that my son wanted me to be part of his family. And what I got in return was a room where I ate alone, a door that wouldn't open when I came home, and a daughter-in-law who made me feel like a stain she couldn't quite remove." Gregory's jaw tightened. "She's not that bad." "You don't understand her." "I understand her perfectly. What I don't understand is you." I took a step toward him, close enough now to see the fear in his eyes. "You let her treat me like something to be endured. You watched. You said nothing. That wasn't Monica's choice, Gregory. That was yours. I was trying to keep the peace. You were trying to disappear, the way you've always done when things get difficult." The words came out harder than I intended, but I didn't take them back. "And I let you. That's my fault. I made excuses for you because I wanted so badly to believe that my son was still in there somewhere, underneath all the silence and the evasion and the endless accommodation." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Pain. Real pain. The kind that comes when someone finally speaks a truth you've been running from. "I don't know how to fix this," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to acknowledge what happened, and I'm asking you to return what's mine." "The money?" "The money is part of it. But more than that, Gregory, I want my dignity back. I want to stop feeling like I need to apologize for existing. I want to walk into a room without wondering who's going to spray something to cover up my smell." My voice cracked on the last word, and I let it. "I am 71 years old. I have lived through things you can't imagine. I saved lives, raised a child, buried a husband, held strangers' hands while they died. I deserve better than what you gave me." The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. "You're right," Gregory said finally. "You do." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a solution. But it was something I hadn't expected. Honesty. A small crack in the wall he had built between us. "I'll talk to Monica," he said. "About the money. About everything. Do that." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mom, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. But I am." "It's a start," I said. "It's not the end, but it's a start." He nodded once, and then he was gone. I listened to his car pull away, the sound of the engine fading into the gray afternoon. Ruth appeared in the doorway. "He looked like a man who just got hit by a truck he didn't see coming," she observed. "Good," I said. "Maybe now he'll learn to look both ways." 2 weeks passed. I stayed with Ruth, paying her what I could afford for room and board despite her protests that my company was payment enough. Nancy sent another letter, more formal this time, outlining the legal remedies available and requesting a response within 30 days. The silence from Gregory and Monica was deafening. I started walking to the library again, reclaiming the routine I had built before everything fell apart. Eleanor and I met for coffee twice a week. I read books I had been meaning to read for years. I slept through the night without dreaming of lavender mist and doors that wouldn't open. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, Bethany showed up. Gregory's daughter. My granddaughter. 16 years old, with her father's brown eyes and her mother's sharp chin, but something in her expression that was entirely her own. I hadn't seen her since I moved in. Monica had always found reasons to keep her away when I was home, and I had been too busy trying to survive to push the issue. She stood on Ruth's porch with her backpack slung over one shoulder and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Hi, Grandma," she said. "Can I come in?" We sat in the living room with tea neither of us touched. Bethany perched on the edge of the sofa like a bird ready to take flight at any moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," she said. "Dad probably suspects, but he didn't try to stop me." "How did you know where I was?" "Mrs. Bergman," I asked her at the mailbox. "She said you were staying here." Bethany looked down at her hands. "I wanted to come earlier, but I didn't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do." She looked up, and I saw something in her eyes I recognized, the particular anguish of someone who has been watching something terrible happen and hasn't known how to stop it. "I saw everything, Grandma. The way Mom treated you, the spray, the comments. I heard what she said on the phone about the deed, about putting you in a home. I should have done something, said something. Instead, I just watched." My heart clenched at the guilt in her voice. "Bethany, you're 16. None of this is your responsibility." "But I could have told you. I could have warned you." "And what would that have changed?" I already knew, deep down. I just didn't want to believe it. She was quiet for a moment, processing that. Then she said, "I didn't record anything. I know sometimes people do that, catch people on video, use it as evidence or whatever. I didn't think of it. That's all right. But I remember." Her voice was steady now, certain. "I remember all of it. Every time she sprayed. Every comment she made about you when she thought no one was listening. The night she opened your window, I heard her talking to Dad about it afterward, laughing about how you wouldn't notice. I remember, Grandma. And I can tell people, if it helps." I reached across the space between us and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. She must have walked here without gloves. "You know what helps most?" I said. "This. You being here. You telling me that I'm not crazy, that it really happened, that someone saw and remembers." I squeezed her hand gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, Bethany. You were a child in your parents' house. What could you have done?" "Something." The word came out small, hurt. "Anything. You're doing something now. That's what matters." She started to cry then. Quiet tears, the kind teenagers cry when they're trying not to. I moved to sit beside her on the sofa and put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small, back before Monica decided that physical affection was coddling. We stayed like that for a long time. Two people holding on to each other in the wreckage of a family that had lost its way. The settlement came through in early March. Gregory, it turned out, had been doing some looking of his own at the legal precedents, at the likely outcome if the case went to trial, at the costs of fighting versus the costs of conceding. Monica resisted, Nancy reported. Monica wanted to call the bluff, convinced that I would back down rather than drag my own son to court. But Gregory, for once in his life, didn't back down first. He called me the night before the papers were signed, not to negotiate or explain, just to talk. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me, "about how I've always tried to disappear when things got hard. You were right. I've been doing that my whole life." "I know. Dad used to say that the measure of a man is what he does when no one's watching. I think I finally understand what he meant." His voice was rough. "When no one was watching, I let Monica treat you like an intruder in your own home. I told myself it was easier, that you didn't really mind, that it would sort itself out eventually. But that was just me disappearing again." I didn't say anything. Some confessions need space to breathe. "The marriage is in trouble," he continued. "I don't know if we'll make it. Probably not, honestly. Bethany told me some things. Things I should have noticed myself. Things I can't unhear. And when I tried to talk to Monica about it, He trailed off. "She said I was choosing you over her." "Are you?" "No. I'm choosing to stop pretending. For the first time in my life." A long pause. "I don't know if you can forgive me, Mom. I don't even know if I want you to. What I did, what I let happen, it's not the kind of thing forgiveness fixes." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. But I'm going to try anyway. To be better, to actually show up, even when it's hard." He exhaled heavily. "I know that's just words right now. I know I have to prove it. Yes, you do. I will. Or I'll die trying." The old Gregory would have ended the conversation there, retreated into silence, waited for the discomfort to pass. But this Gregory stayed on the line, and I realized he was crying. Quiet tears, the kind that come when something that's been frozen finally starts to thaw. "I love you, Mom," he said. I should have said that more. I should have showed it. "I love you too," I said. I never stopped, even when I wanted to. I moved into my own apartment in April. It was small. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a bathroom where you could touch both walls if you stretched out your arms. But it was mine. My name on the lease. My key in the lock. My blood pressure medication in the cabinet where I could find it any time I needed. The first night, I just walked through the rooms, touching things. The walls I could paint any color I wanted. The windows I could open or close according to my own preference. The thermostat I could set to whatever temperature made me comfortable. These small freedoms, the kind most people take for granted, felt revolutionary. I had forgotten what it was like to live somewhere I was welcome. To wake up in the morning without that small knot of dread in my stomach, wondering what today's humiliation would be. To eat breakfast at my own pace, in my own kitchen, without someone sighing about how long it was taking. The settlement had given me enough to live on, not lavishly, but comfortably. Enough for rent and food and the occasional dinner out with Eleanor, who had become the closest thing I had to family besides Bethany. Enough to buy a new photograph frame for my picture of Raymond, to replace the one I had left behind in the house I would never enter again. Ruth helped me move in. So did Nancy, who had waived most of her fees because, as she put it, some cases are about justice, not billing. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs and arranged furniture in rooms too small to hold much, and by the end of the day, the apartment felt like something I could learn to call home. "It's cozy," Ruth announced, settling into my one good armchair with a glass of wine. And it smells like absolutely nothing, which I imagine is exactly what you wanted. I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts in your belly and works its way up. You have no idea. That night, after everyone left, I walked through my empty apartment and let myself feel the silence. Not the hostile silence of Gregory's house, nor the borrowed silence of Ruth's guest room. My silence. The silence of a woman who had finally found a place where she was allowed to take up space without apologizing. I stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot and the bare trees and the ugly strip mall across the street, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Bethany came on Saturdays. She would arrive around noon, usually with coffee from the shop near her school and some story about her week. A test she had aced, a friend who was being difficult, a teacher who didn't understand her sense of humor. We would sit in my small living room or walk to the park down the street. And for a few hours, I would feel like a grandmother again, instead of a problem to be solved. She told me about the situation at home, though I tried not to pry. Gregory had moved into the guest room. The divorce papers were being drawn up. Monica was furious, blaming me, blaming Bethany, blaming everyone except herself. She keeps saying you ruined her life, Bethany reported one Saturday, picking at a blueberry muffin. Which is funny, because from where I'm sitting, she ruined her own life by being awful to you. People rarely see themselves as the villain, I said, even when they're holding the spray can. Bethany laughed, then sobered. Dad's different now. Quieter, but not in the bad way. More like he's actually thinking about things instead of just going along with whatever's easiest. That's progress. Yeah. She was silent for a moment. He wants to see you. He asks about you every time I come home, but he's scared you'll say no. I thought about that. The anger was still there, buried deep, a wound that would probably never fully heal. But anger wasn't the same as hatred, and hatred wasn't the same as closing a door forever. Tell him he can call me, I said finally, when he's ready. I can't promise it won't be hard, but I can promise I'll listen. Bethany's face lit up in a way that made my heart ache. Thanks, Grandma, she said. Gregory called the following Tuesday. The conversation was short, stilted, full of pauses that stretched too long and words that didn't quite fit. We talked about the weather, his job, my apartment. Safe topics, the kind you use when you're circling something too big to address directly. I'd like to see you, he said finally. If you're willing. I'm willing to try. We agreed to meet for lunch at a diner halfway between my apartment and his house. Neutral territory, public space, all the safeguards you need when trust has been broken and you're not sure if it can be rebuilt. He arrived before I did, already seated in a booth by the window. He stood when I came in, the way Raymond always did when I entered a room, and that small gesture undid something in me I hadn't known was knotted. Mom, he said. Gregory. We sat. We ordered coffee. We didn't touch the menus. I don't know where to start, he admitted. Neither do I. But we have to start somewhere. So we did. Slowly, awkwardly, like two people learning a language they used to speak fluently. He told me about the divorce proceedings, the therapy he had started, the long, hard look at himself that had begun on the day I refused to sign those papers. I told him about my apartment, about Ruth and Eleanor, about the small life I was building from the ashes of the one I had tried to buy. We didn't solve anything. We didn't fix what was broken, but we sat across from each other and talked, really talked, for the first time in longer than I could remember. And when we said goodbye in the parking lot, an awkward hug, a promise to do this again, I realized that this too was a kind of beginning. Summer came late that year, reluctant, as if even the weather wasn't sure the world deserved warmth. But it came eventually, the way things do if you wait long enough. I spent June reading on my small balcony, watching the trees turn green and the children from the building next door run through the sprinkler in the courtyard below. I cooked meals for myself, elaborate meals that took hours and filled my apartment with smells no one would ever complain about. I made my grandmother's borscht and ate it slowly, savoring every bite, remembering how Monica had wrinkled her nose at the smell. I made pierogi and stuffed cabbage and all the dishes Raymond used to love, and I set a place for him at my tiny table even though he wasn't there to fill it. I called Raymond's photograph handsome every morning and told him about my day every night, and if that made me a crazy old woman, well, there were worse things to be. I told him about the apartment, about Eleanor and Ruth, about the slow mending of my relationship with Gregory. I told him I was sorry I had almost broken my promise, the one about not disappearing. I told him I was trying to do better. Some days I imagined I could hear him answer. "That's my girl," he'd say, in that warm voice I missed like a phantom limb. "Knew you had it in you." Gregory and I had lunch every other week now. The conversations were getting easier, though we still circled the hardest topics, like ships avoiding rocks in a harbor. He didn't mention Monica. I didn't ask. Some wounds need time to close before you can bear to look at them directly. The divorce finalized in July. Bethany told me about it before Gregory did. She had been there when the papers arrived, had watched her father sign them with hands that shook only a little. Monica was moving to Seattle, where her sister lived. The house, my $180,000 house, was being sold. Gregory was using his share to buy a smaller place closer to his office. "It's weird," Bethany told me. "I thought I'd be sadder, but mostly I just feel relieved. Like we've all been holding our breath for years, and finally someone said we could exhale." "Sometimes endings are beginnings in disguise," I said. She rolled her eyes. 16, still allergic to anything that sounded like wisdom. But she smiled, too. On the anniversary of the day I sold my condo, I did something I had been thinking about for months. I went back to 4718 Maple Drive. Not to confront anyone or claim anything, just to see it. To stand in front of the house I had tried to buy my way into and finally let it go. The drive took 20 minutes. I could have walked. I was in better shape now than I had been in years, all those daily walks to the library having strengthened muscles I'd forgotten I had. But I wanted to arrive calm, composed, ready for whatever feelings might surface. The new owners had painted the shutters blue, a color Monica would have hated. There was a swing set in the backyard now, visible from the street, and a child's bicycle abandoned on the front lawn. A woman my age sat on the porch, reading something on a tablet, a cup of coffee steaming beside her. She looked up as my car slowed, gave a small wave, the automatic friendliness of someone who has nothing to hide, and went back to her reading. Ordinary signs of ordinary life, belonging to people who had no idea about the history buried in these walls. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. The house looked different somehow, smaller, maybe, or just less significant. It was remarkable how a building could hold so much power over you, and then, one day, hold none at all. I stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk for a long time, letting the memories wash over me. The hope I had felt when I first arrived. the slow suffocation of the months that followed. The lavender spray, the locked door, the cold room with the open window, all of it, everything that had happened here, reduced now to a story I could tell or not tell as I chose. I thought about Monica, somewhere in Seattle, probably spraying air freshener to cover whatever smell she found offensive there. I thought about Gregory, trying to rebuild himself from pieces he had let scatter for decades. I thought about myself, 71 years old, alone but not lonely, standing in front of a house that had almost swallowed me whole. And I thought about what Eleanor had said all those months ago in the coffee shop next to the library. The wound you don't examine is the one that kills you. I had examined this wound. I had cleaned it, dressed it, let it heal as much as it was going to. The scar would always be there. I knew that. But scars are just proof that you survived something, and survival was enough. Goodbye, I said to the house. Not loudly, just a murmur under my breath, a word for myself and the air and the blue-painted shutters that would never know what had happened here. Then I turned and walked away, and I didn't look back. Ruth died in September, quietly, in her sleep, the way she always said she wanted to go. Nancy called me at 6 a.m. with the news, her voice steady in that particular way voices get when they're holding back grief. The funeral was small but full. Decades of neighbors and friends, all gathered to say goodbye to a woman who had lived long enough to earn their love. I sat in the front row next to Nancy, my hand in hers, and thought about the night Ruth had opened her door to a stranger who needed somewhere to land. She left me her grandmother's porcelain shepherd in her will. For Vivian, the note said, who knows something about holding on and letting go. I keep it on the shelf above my kitchen window, where the morning light catches it just right. Every time I see it, I think about Ruth saying that the thing about being old is that you've already lost so much. She was right about that. But she was also right about something else. That losing things doesn't mean you're empty. It just means you have more room for whatever comes next. I am 72 years old now. Another birthday, another year, another collection of days to fill however I choose. Gregory calls every Sunday. The conversations are easier now, almost comfortable. He told me last week that he's thinking about dating again. Nothing serious, just dinner, maybe. And I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Hope. The small, tentative hope of a man who is finally learning that it's possible to try again. Bethany is applying to colleges. She wants to be a lawyer, she says, like Nancy. Someone who helps people protect what's theirs. I told her I thought that was a fine idea. I have a life now, a small one, maybe. Smaller than the life I had imagined when I signed over everything I owned for a room in my son's house. But it's mine. Every corner of it, every choice, every breath I take without anyone spraying anything to cover up the smell. I think sometimes about the woman I was on that first day, walking through lavender mist with a book clutched in my hands. I think about how small she had made herself. How many pieces of herself she had given away. How close she came to disappearing entirely. She didn't deserve what happened to her. But she survived it. She walked through it and came out the other side, not unscathed, but unbowed.
You know, this story is a huge wake-up call. We often shrink ourselves just to please people who will never actually value us. But here's the real lesson. Your dignity is not negotiable. Real love makes room for you. It doesn't ask you to disappear or apologize for existing. If you're in a place where you're being managed instead of celebrated, please listen to me. You deserve better. Now go find it.